Yo guys, Revenge here, and the game has obviously been changing a lot because of preseason items. I'm going to bring you guys a lot of tips and tricks to improve your gameplay, especially for top lane, with some of the champions that I've been playing a lot in the preseason. Alright, so here we are now in a practice tool, and I'm just going to run through some of the items that I've been playing, at least on Jayce for now, and then I can just talk to you guys about how some of these items work on other champions as well. But as you guys can see, since the preseason began, there are different classes of items. There's Mythic, Legendary, Epic, then obviously like your basics and starters. So with Jayce, I'm usually starting with D-Blade, of course, but you can also start with Longsword and Refillable Potion depending on the matchups you do. But my first Mythic item I go on Jayce, and usually my only on him, is actually Eclipse. It's been the strongest item by far on Jayce. Here, I'm going to add some gold and buy it. Show you guys. So, the unique thing about this item, and something new that they added to the game, was that it gives Omnivamp, which is basically the old, Death Stance and Gunblade passive, which just heals off of all your abilities, spells, auto attacks, and everything. So here, I'll take some damage from red buff here, get me nice and low. And you can just heal off of your Q. I know it doesn't do much healing because I'm pretty low level, but here, I'll show you guys. Look at that. Healing off of your QE, for example, which is really unique, and something that that just synergizes really well with Jayce because he switches forms, goes into Q, W, and E. Now, they did change Yumu's a bit. I know Yumu's was a really popular item on Jayce. It was usually his first item that you would complete. It gives the same amount of lethality. It has pretty much the same passive, but now it builds from Longsword instead of CDR. So the unique thing that Riot did with CDR is they changed it to something called Ability Haste, which is basically the same thing. I mean, there's like a calculator for this, so if you buy Cleaver, which gives 25 haste, you could see that this equates to 20% CDR, essentially. And on items like Yumu's, now that isn't going to be given, so you're kind of just building Yumu's for raw damage at this point. So usually if I'm snowballing on Jayce, I would go from Eclipse, Yumu's, and then I'd start looking into other items that would, benefit me, such as Cleaver, which is still really good, and a new item they added, which is Sorelda's Grudge. Now this item is really, really cool. I want to show you guys exactly what it does. You're pretty much, as you guys can see, it pretty much applies a slow to creeps and champions based on abilities that you hit on them. So it's basically like an AD Rylai's, and it works obviously extremely well with Jayce because you're poking with your EQ, and it gives armor pen, AD, and CDR. So definitely an item that you want to buy on Jayce. Now, popular question I'm asked a lot when I'm streaming is whether or not you should always rush Eclipse items instead of, Mythic items instead of other legendary items. I think there's definitely a lot of cases on a lot of champions now that you could buy legendary items first before going into mythics. Like take Aurelia, for example, another champion that's played a decent amount in top lane and mid lane. A very good item to rush first on her is actually Blade of the Ruined King, because it just gives way too many good stats. It synergizes really well with her kit, and then you could pivot into another mythic item depending on how the game is going, right? Like Triforce is really good if you're fighting a lot. Sunder is really good if you're fighting against tanks. Stridebreaker if you need that extra gap close. These are all good mythics on fighters that you can get depending on how the game is going. And the thing is, you want to be very smart about the mythic that you buy, because each mythic grants a passive unique to it, right? So depending on how the game's going, that passive can actually be really important because it scales off of all the items that you buy, all your other legendary items, that is. So if I'm playing Aurelia against 3 tanks, right, I'm definitely going to want to build Blade of the Ruined King into Divine Sunder, because as you can see, the mythic passive of it provides 5% armor penetration and 5% magic penetration, and it gives a armor shredding passive with it as well, or not armor shredding, just health shredding, right? So these are just all things now that you can consider on all of your champions before committing to that mythic slot, because it pretty much can decide, the majority of your power spikes throughout the entire game. So another thing that's been added into the game is a lot of these anti-healing items. Like we have Chempunk Chainsword, we have a new version of Mortal Reminder, and for mages we have Oblivion Orb, which is 800 gold now and applies Grievous Wounds. We have this item, Chemtech Purifier, and obviously Morellonomicon. The thing is, there is definitely a lot more healing in the game now that Riot has added, especially on fighters with the new Ravenous Hydra giving Omnivamp. Omnivamp in general is just a really strong form of healing in the game right now, and a lot of champions are abusing it, both mages and fighters. So you kind of, at least at some point in the game, want to complete some form of anti-heal depending on who you're against, right? And the thing is, the bad thing about anti-healing now is that, yes, your cheap Executioner and Grievous Wounds spies with Oblivion Orb and Executioner will only apply 40% Grievous Wounds, but completing the items is what applies 60, which is obviously a lot more. But the items are a lot less rewarding compared to just completing other items. Like, this item's stats are just really underwhelming, for example. Even more Reminder stats are pretty underwhelming compared to completing something else like Phantom Dancer, or completing something else as a fighter, such as like Death's Dance, right? These items are just way more effective in carrying games than just building anti-heal. Whereas before Preseason, going from Executioner into Mortal Reminder, or just, you know, or having the Grievous Wounds in something like Morello's was something that actually was a lot easier to build and keep in your build. But now you have a lot of these variations of items that are just weaker. So it is kind of like a trade-off, a more balanced system. It just feels worse to complete the further version of the anti-heal, like in Chempunk Chainsword. But yeah, a lot of the games I'm playing, having anti-healing is really important. And it's something that you need to be ready to build and know how to build on a lot of your champions at the right timings, of course. So yeah, it is very nice as a mage, though, to be able to go the early Oblivion Orb. For example, if I'm playing Akali against Aatrox, right? Aatrox is obviously a champion that would heal a lot, and it would swing the matchup to his favor. But now, as Akali, you can just build the 800 gold Oblivion Orb and pretty much take over the matchup in the early game, which is when Aatrox is, going to want to have some of that pressure or power points. It's the same thing as, in mid lane playing mages like Ryze, right? Now, before, if you're playing Ryze against Aurelia, for example, Aurelia would pretty much just heal all your damage, because there's just no way Ryze is going to be able to build any form of anti-heal until way later in the game. But now, Ryze can just recall at, first base and purchase an Oblivion Orb. And he can pretty much have a fighting chance at winning what is said, before would be like an 80-20 matchup, right? Simply because he can apply Grievous Wounds a lot earlier now, without really hurting his build path too much and just, hurting his overall economy. So that's just something that's changed the game a little bit in some matchups, in some of the healing matchups early in. But healing has just gotten so much more effective now that I still think that is really strong, and that these anti-healing components don't necessarily completely ruin healing champions, like strong healing champions like Aatrox, for example. Alright guys, thanks for watching. I really hope that you learned a few things about the new items and changes. I'm going to be trying to make a lot more informative content for the team and for you guys. So let me know if you guys want me to talk about anything, any specific champions, any specific items that you want me to go over. I'll be glad to read over them and do it in my next video. Thanks for watching.